Hello, I'm Llewellyn King, the host of White House Chronicle. Thank you for coming along. I'm joined, as always, by Adam Clayton Powell III, co-host of the program. And today I'm very excited to be able to introduce to you, or in fact to reintroduce to you on this program, the distinguished journalist Hedrick Smith. He has had a towering career at the New York Times as an author of books and as the producer of television shows. He is a Pulitzer Prize winner and an Emmy winner. Hedrick, welcome to the broadcast, and maybe you could tell us quickly what you've been up to.
Well, Llewellyn, it's always great to be back with you. Always fun to talk with you. Like everybody else, I'm tracking Donald Trump and what's happening to American government, but I'm also taking a look back at history and some of the things that I covered: the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights movement, the explosion of economic inequality in this country, the explosion of chaos politics with Newt Gingrich and others, and how all those factors, the fracturing of America, figured into the rise of Donald Trump and where we are today. Because I think a lot of people look at Trump and say, how did it happen? And they look back at the polls of the last election, or maybe the first election in 2016, and that doesn't begin to scrape the surface of what's going on in this country. And I think we need to understand that if we're going to do anything about what's going on now, damaging our democracy.
Donald Trump has been in office in this term for 9 months. He has 39 months to go, and he's already made arguably as many changes as any president going back to Franklin Roosevelt, but maybe longer. What do you think is going to happen in the next 3 years?
I think we're going to see more of this, certainly up through the midterm election of 2026. Donald Trump is gaining steam. The more he's able to do and get away with, the more he's tempted to try to get away with. I mean, the last few months, the last few weeks even, we've seen this whole episode in the Caribbean and attacking Venezuela going on. And we see expansion of the use of the National Guard in more cities. Everywhere you turn, the firing of prosecuting attorneys who refuse to bring indictments against his political enemies, the indictment of Comey and Letitia James, the New York Attorney General. He's gaining steam. The question is, where is the resistance going to come from? And at the moment, the only resistance we can see is in the district courts. Will the Supreme Court back them up? Some major cases are coming to the Supreme Court right now on the tariffs, on the use of the Alien Enemies Act to try to deport people. So major decisions are coming up to the Supreme Court. We're going to have a test. I have a feeling the court's afraid of Trump. It's acted as if it was afraid of Trump on any number of cases. I think 15, 16 cases where district judges have said, no, you can't do this. You can't cut these funds. You can't send troops into to these cities. You can't do this or that or the other thing. The Supreme Court has suspended the temporary restraining orders of the district court, making it look as though either it buys Trump's notion that the president can do whatever he wants, which I doubt, or more likely is afraid that if it rules against him, he won't abide by the rule. And then what happens in a showdown? We've never had that happen in American history. It goes all the way back to Marbury versus Madison. The first time the Supreme Court issued a ruling against the president was against President Jefferson. John Marshall, Chief Justice, was worried that Jefferson wouldn't abide by the ruling. Fortunately, he did. But we've only had that one test in our history, and Trump may push it. Now, what happens after 2026 depends upon what happens in 2026. And that depends upon how much an indicator the No Kings rallies were just the other day on Saturday, when millions of people turned out in 2,600 cities across the country saying, we don't want a king, we don't want a monarch, we don't want a president running amok. Is that going to be an electoral majority that's going to come and turn out Republican majorities in the House and Senate, or isn't it? We don't know. But that is going to be a critical do or die point in many ways for American democracy.
Hedrick, when you left Moscow, having been the New York Times correspondent there, you wrote what became a seminal book on Russia called, appropriately, The Russians. Looking at Russia today, do you understand in any way why Trump seems to be so appreciative of Putin?
Trump admires Putin. Trump has long admired Putin. Putin has long captivated Trump. People are thinking at the moment that, well, does the KGB have some dirty stuff on Trump and they're blackmailing him, or is Putin muscling Trump in some way? Trump said back in 2015 to his longtime lieutenant, enforcer, lawyer, Michael Cohen, Putin isn't just the president of Russia. He's the ruler. He's the dictator. He can do whatever he wants, and he's going to be there for the rest of his life. Now, those aren't the exact words, but it's very close to what he said. When Putin was named Man of the Year in 2007 by Time magazine, Trump sent him a note and says, "I'm a great fan of yours. You absolutely deserve this." He was fawning. He was falling all over Putin. So I think Putin has the moxie on Trump. Putin has been doing for years what Trump wants to do. That is to rule absolutely, to have absolute autocratic power, to be more than a king, to be a czar, to be an emperor, and to extend the rule of Russia across Eastern Europe. He's doing Trump is now doing it in the Caribbean. We're starting to see, the rebirth of gunboat diplomacy in America. We're back to McKinley. We're back to the late 19th century. Well, that's in many ways copycatting what Putin does with Russia trying to take over Ukraine and go back and push Russian empire over Eastern Europe again. So I think it's not just maybe Putin's smarter than Trump. Putin certainly knows where he's going. Trump is an improviser, and Putin has a clear strategy. We see him go into summit meetings. He goes into a summit meeting in Helsinki in his first term, and everybody has been hollering in this country about the Russians interfering in the election campaign of 2016. Trump is supposed to go in and confront Putin about that. He comes out and says, well, Putin says he didn't do it. Why shouldn't I believe him? And then in this presidency, he goes and meets Putin in Alaska. And the whole idea is he's pushing a ceasefire in Ukraine, stop the fighting, stop the war, take the battle lines we have today, and then try to make a peace agreement. And he comes out and he's spouting Putin's line, and the ceasefire has just disappeared. Putin clearly has a psychological one-up mastery over Trump. And I think it goes way back, much longer than the time Trump has been in office.
Let's stay on Russia for a minute. My former CBS News colleague, Marvin Cow, has been saying, and I'm sure you know him, has been saying that he talks to Russians, ordinary Russians and Russian leaders over different electronic internet channels. And he says that the war with the invasion of Ukraine is really beginning to be felt in gasoline rationing, people leaving the country. If they're rich enough, you go to Dubai or maybe London. If you're not so rich, you go to Uzbekistan or Korea. Do you think any of this makes any difference at all to Putin?
Well, no. In the short run, no. In the long run, maybe. I mean, part of it is we look at the world and the way other people think and operate as if they were Americans. Russians aren't Americans. Russians are very long-suffering people. Stop and think about what they lived through in World War II. We lived through World War II. We lost a lot of people, but we sent folks overseas. Russia was invaded. 20 million people died in the war. They saw Nazi troops march all the way to Moscow. There was a siege of Leningrad that lasted 900 days, and they didn't give up. So the Russians are used to tightening their belt a hell of a lot more than we are. Yes, it probably is bothering people. There probably are complaints. There are certainly mothers and wives who are upset about sons and husbands who went off to war and didn't come back. And there are stories, and maybe Marvin has some from direct contact with people over there. I've got great regard for Marvin. He's an old friend and a very, very good correspondent. And his knowledge of Russia is great. He's probably hearing from people saying there are demonstrations and protests of mothers and their lamentations at funerals for military casualties, guys who come home in a box or a body bag. And that is going on. But the Russians have an endurance, an ability to live through the winter. And I don't mean just the snow, I mean the winter of war, in a way that we can't imagine as people. Already we're itchy and worried about whether or not Trump's tariffs are going to raise inflation or cut the job rate down, cause unemployment, cause difficulties, and will react to a much less severe change than they will. And of course, he's got an autocratic police state that arrests people that cause much trouble. Just the other day, they arrested they arrested a street musician gang, a bunch of modern kids who are playing anti-Putin, anti-war music. So they don't fool around over there. And we're risking some of that here now. We're starting to see an edging towards that, but we're not there yet, and hopefully we won't get there.
Hedrick, long after you published The Russians, you took a totally different course and you published this book, Who Stole the American Dream? And that became sort of your life's work suddenly. You were lecturing, you were traveling, you were making television programs. What became of that? The American dream would seem to have not been stolen, but to be totally abandoned at this time.
Well, you're asking a really important, pregnant question that we ignore too much when we're talking about politics today, and particularly the politics of Trump. From the period up until 1980, from World War II, the American middle class was experiencing a rise in its standard of living that roughly kept up with what was happening to the rich. Since 1980, there's a wedge been driven, and we've become two Americas economically. The 1% and the 0.1%, and even the top 10%, which includes probably all three of us, have been soaring off the top of the cliff. And the rest of the country has been falling off that cliff. And we have two Americas now. And if you go back and look at the impact of that politically and look at the election of 2016, it's very important. People forget we had two rebellions in both political parties in 2016. Donald Trump ran as an advocate of the working class against the establishment Republicans. He had 15 Republicans who were pro-business, who were pro-suburban Republicans, well-educated and well-off Republicans. And he ran on the other side trying to grab the people who were aggrieved and left out by globalization. But we forget, in the Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders did the same thing. Bernie Sanders came from the great political powerhouse of Vermont with its 3 electoral votes, for crying out loud. He was a 70-year-old white-haired socialist. Okay, he came from nowhere and he was running against who? Hillary Clinton, the establishment candidate. He won 13 primaries. He got 9 million votes. He damn near took the nomination away from her. What does that say? That says that on both sides, in the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party, there was a rebellion against the establishment. Bernie Sanders was getting the votes of the same kind of people that Donald Trump was, people who were dispossessed, people who were downwardly mobile, people who felt they were left out by globalization, people who felt Wall Street and the corporate America was screwing them. So this was happening on both sides. And it came from exactly what you asked about, this division, this stealing of the American dream. And by the way, I didn't use the word stolen casually. I started out working on that book thinking that the division economically had just happened. And when I got done with the reporting, I conclude, no, the big banks, the people on Wall Street, the corporate leaders deliberately took money away from the middle class and pushed them down and lifted the 1% higher. So until we fix that, we're going to continue to have this terribly angry, boiling, working middle class that's willing to go anywhere. I mean, some of them voted for Barack Obama and then switched and voted for Trump. Some of them voted for Bill Clinton and in the end voted for Trump. We don't know where they're going to go in 2026.
Some of what you've been saying, and the person who comes to mind is Marty Barron, one of the most respected editors of our time, the Boston Globe, Washington Post. He was our guest a year ago. And I asked him, how did the Washington Post and others miss the support that Donald Trump was getting? It was so much support that he's been elected twice now president. And without missing a beat, Marty said, because we stopped covering people who had to choose between paying the rent and paying for food. You agree?
No question. No, I agree. I think The growth of American economic inequality is the single biggest story that the mainstream media missed, not just in the elections, but for 20 years. We didn't wake up to that story until the Occupy Wall Street movement. That woke us up. We find when somebody finally said, "Hey, this is outrageous. We're going to shut down Wall Street. We're going to go down there where that brass bull is sitting there, symbolizing the bulls in the stock market who are making absolute fortunes." They said, "This is wrong." And suddenly we had a story to cover. And then we woke up and said, "Oh my God, we'd been covering the closing of the bicycle factory in Circleville, Ohio. We've been covering the closing of other clothing factories. So we've been watching lawnmowers and then eventually Apple computers and so forth, all going overseas in those jobs. We've been covering the story one by one. We've been covering the dots. We didn't connect the dots. Our job is to connect the dots, to give people the pattern, to let them understand what the undertow is, what the undercurrents are that are moving history in a new direction. And that's why I'm on this economic stuff so firmly, because I agree with Marty Brown. We didn't just miss it at that story, at that election. We didn't just miss Trump's election. We missed the reason. We missed the cause. We missed the ache. We missed the boiling anger. We missed the resentment, the class resentment that had happened. We didn't understand how bitterly people felt. And we were watching, we kept reading the gross statistics, the macro statistics, GDP, economic power was growing, prosperity was growing, the average income was going up. Of course, the average gets boosted by the billionaires who walk into the bar and suddenly everybody's average income has gone up and nothing has happened. What we were missing is exactly what you said. We weren't covering the people who had to go from a $25 an hour job in a steel mill and become a greeter at Walmart for $10.25 an hour. I mean, that's just a huge change in people's lives. And they were feeling that loss and that pain. And Trump tapped into that.
Hedrick, you make a very direct attack on the media for having missed this vast shift, the so-called, and I'm not sure what you call it, the intelligentsia that failed to inform. I mean, the media is not something that operates in a vacuum. It is advised, it is told, it covers what people say, it covers what people think, and the debate was not joined, so the media missed it.
Well, I think you're right. I think we, as a society, we missed it. Certainly, a lot of academics woke up to it after Wall Street after the Occupy Wall Street movement. But I mean, the Democratic Party, the labor unions, these were institutions that were organized largely to represent the economic hard-pressed portion of America. And they missed it to I mean, the Democratic Party is in trouble today because it missed that in terms of a serious commitment to doing something about it. And they've got millions, tens of millions of people who don't trust them anymore because they dropped the ball. Yeah, I agree with you. The press wasn't alone. But you know, our job is to be curious and probing and difficult and prickly and to go after things that other people don't pay attention to. And yeah, we do need smart professors and smart economists and smart free thinkers who tip us off. There's no question about that. So there's plenty of blame to go around.
Let's talk about your work now. You're working on a new book, right?
Yes.
Please tell us about it.
Well, I was lucky enough to be present at some of the really interesting and pivotal moments of the last 40, 50, 60 years, dare I say. I was in Nashville, Tennessee when the sit-ins in the civil rights movement broke out in 1960. I was in Vietnam in 1963, 64, and then I covered the Pentagon Papers when that came out in 1971. And, you know, those are pivotal moments. And then I happened to be doing a documentary series for PBS on American government when Newt Gingrich was taking power and the chaos politics and the politics of political polarization were going on. And so I started to go back over and think about that stuff and how those events and those watershed turning points in American history were affecting us now. And it seemed to me that there was a connection. And so I sat down. Actually, I wasn't going to write a book. And a friend of mine in the media Finley Lewis, the Minneapolis frontier, St. Paul frontier, said, "You ought to write a book. You've had a different experience than the rest of us." And I said, "Oh, no, everybody writes books. Journalists write books." And he said, "No, but you've been in different places. Most of us have been in the state capitol, and then we've come to Washington, and we're in the national capital. But you've had a lot of different experiences: Saigon, Cairo, Moscow, American South, all over the place." And so I started to put it together, and it made sense to me that what we are looking at today, and I started before Trump's second term, I was writing still when Biden was president, that a lot of the trouble we're in today, as we've just been discussing, had happened on a watch that I had been present for. And so I started to tell those stories and put them together. And I think it's important for us to understand the roots of our problems if we're going to get out of them. And then I started to look at what are the issues, what are the mechanisms that have gone wrong. I mean, we all grew up being taught that there was a separation of powers, that Congress declared war, that Congress had the power of the purse, and the government operated in a certain way. And as I began to think about it, I thought, government, even pre-Trump, wasn't operating the same way as we had been taught in high school and in college. Power over the last 90 years, from Franklin Roosevelt through the Cold War onward, with the nuclear bomb that had to be carried around, the nuclear suitcase that had to be carried around with the president, power moved from Congress to the White House long before Trump got into office, particularly the second time. And Congress became more and more dysfunctional, constantly polarized, constantly hit by shutdowns, ineffective. When I came to Washington in 1962 to work for the New York Times, budgets got passed routinely every year. Congress passed 13 appropriations bills for different parts of the government. It happened every year. There were compromises. I don't know if you know, but there were 70 Republicans who voted for Medicare, along with 170 Democrats, So bipartisanship, compromise on the national highway system, on the race to the moon with the Russians, on Medicare, on Medicaid, on a whole slew of things was absolutely common. And then I saw it's pulled apart. There used to be, I've talked to political scientists, they used to graph the voting patterns of Democrats and Republicans in Congress, and they make a little dot for each one. And the dots in the Democrats and the Republicans overlapped. Northern Republicans like Jake Javits, the senator from New York, or Clifford Case, senator from New Jersey, or John Sherman Cooper from Kentucky, or Mac Mathias from Maryland, they overlapped. They were to the left of Southern Democrats like John Stennis of Mississippi, people like that. And there were gypsy moth Republicans who voted with Democratic presidents, and there were boll weevil Democrats who voted with Republican presidents. We don't see that anymore. Do you know that there was never a single party line vote on any major issue in the American Congress from 1945 until 1993? Let me repeat that. Not a single party line vote for 48 years. Party line votes are now routine. That's an enormous change. The founding fathers never imagined that we would have what the British call party government. Well, our system is constructed to require compromise. We now have a political system that is gelled in partisanship. But we're not going to get out of our problems until we start to fix that. Now, we got immediate crises because of what Donald Trump is doing to the rule of law and the use of force and the spending power of Congress. So we got to deal with those immediately. But if we're going to fix what's going on and get back to what you and I learned about as the American system when we were going through school and college and came out as young people into the electorate, we're going to have to do a lot more fixing and a lot more thinking about fundamentally what this country is about, and what democracy is, and what a republic is with the separation of powers.
I have a double-barreled question. First, when can we look forward to seeing your new book? When will it be on the shelves? And more importantly, how do you see us going forward and getting out of the crisis you have outlined?
Well, let me share with you something interesting. My literary agent told me he couldn't sell my book that this was too serious a book, that this was a book that had way too broad a span, way too broad a sweep, that this kind of book doesn't sell in America today. I'm working on it now with some independent publishers, so I can't answer your question, but I'm shocked and horrified by that. I've written 5 best-selling books. People have been interested in the stuff, and the guy said to me, oh yeah, well, that's the kind of stuff people used to read, but they don't read that now. Well, maybe that's part of our problem, that we're not paying attention in the same way. It's disturbing. I'm hoping it'll be out sometime next April, May, June, but publishers don't move very fast. That's another problem.
And you were going to tell me about how you see the future?
Well, I can't see past 2026. 2026 is a critical watershed. How the election goes in 2026 is critical. Traditionally, not just with Trump, but midterm elections 2 years after a president takes office are usually bad for the incumbent president's party. If you go back to 1938, I think the typical loss of House seats is somewhere about 24, 25 seats, and the typical loss of Senate seats is 2, 3, 4 seats. So if we have a typical election, control of the House would switch back to the Democrats. And I don't know, it's iffy in the Senate. Nobody knows. If that happens, at least there is a political break on what Trump can do. There are going to be investigations, there are going to be hearings, and that kind of stuff. If that doesn't happen, if the Republicans retain control of both the House and the Senate, I wouldn't be surprised at all that Trump will find some reason to try to call off the presidential election of 2028 and become what Putin is, a president for life. So I can't tell you which is going to happen. All I can tell you is the stakes are enormously high in the 2026 election, and the people who are unhappy today or uncertain today have better make sure they go to the polls.
Well, I have to say, you have the last word. It wasn't your plan, but we're out of time. But you may be in your 90s, but you seem just as acute as you ever have been in the long time that I've followed you. That's White House Chronicle for today. Thank you so much.